Hey guys, I wanted to talk to you guys about how I created this page in Remix and some of the uh, interesting techniques I chose to use in building it. Um, Before we get into the code, one thing that I'd like to call out is at the fact that one thing that's really cool about Remix is you can more or less write a lot of your code so that it works without JavaScript being enabled. So here I've got this thing called a filter, and if I click on it, you can see a modal shows up. I can make some selections and click show products, and you can see that the URL is changing in accordance to that. So what's cool about that is on the back end, if I want to go and know, hey, what are all of the filters that are being applied before I show all of my products, I could do something like export function loader. And now here I'm potentially going to be returning products, right? But here inside of my request, this is going to be data function args. Inside of my request, I can say const URL equals exactly that. And then we can grab search params from it. And here we can see all of the different filters that we get applied here through our search params in the query. So before I show this list of products, I can then filter it based off of the fit, the color, the type, and the category. And you can access all of this information directly from the URL. So the URL is more or less your use state, so to speak, which is kind of interesting. Another thing you might notice is here we're like opening and closing a modal. Typically you need like some kind of Boolean to do that. But if you notice here we've got this products or /products URL. But if I click on filter, we go /products/filter. So actually what's happening on the back end is you're actually rendering a completely separate page. But since Remix understands how to do client-side navigation, it more or less just works with or without JavaScript. Obviously, when you turn JavaScript on, the experience is a much nicer experience, but it is nice to know that you can build something complicated like this without using any JavaScript. So now with JavaScript turned back on, we get some nice things out of the box. One of the things is now we have animations. So if I click that filter button, you can see there's a backdrop that fades in, and then also the drawer slides in. One thing to note is this is a mobile-friendly site, and so if I go and hit filter now, I get a filter sheet instead of a filter drawer, because from a mobile perspective, that's a more convenient way to interact with floating navigation. All right, so let's dive in and figure out how I went about doing this. So at a high level, we have our products page. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And the products page is effectively that /products URL. Now down here we have this thing called an outlet. If you guys aren't familiar with what an outlet is, it's effectively just a component that React Router exposes, which is what Remix uses to signal that this is a child page. So here we have our products filter, and products filter is literally just the form for for that modal. And so that modal gets rendered, but it actually uses this products page as its layout. So now you might be wondering, like, how did we do some of the more nuanced interaction? Like, for example, here, if the filter's open, you notice how I can't scroll anymore. And if I click here, I can close the modal. So how is that being done? There's actually this really interesting hook called use matches. If you're not familiar with what use matches is, let's go ahead and read the docs. So here it says, returns the current route matches on the page. This is useful for creating layout abstractions with your current routes. So there's the key piece right here. This is useful for creating layout abstractions. So that's what we're doing. We're creating a layout abstraction. So here, after calling use matches, we get matches back. I created this custom function called should show outlet, and we pass in the matches. Effectively, what we're doing is saying, hey, out of all the matches, is the last match not the current page that we're viewing. So here, this is routes products. You can find out what these IDs are just by running like a simple console log and taking a look at the data on matches. And it'll tell you what the ID is for that particular page. I found that out by literally just doing that and saying, hey, if the last match is not this page, then we do want to show the outlet. And so here we're saying we're storing the result from should show outlet to something called is child route, and is child route then says, cool, let's go ahead and add overflow hidden and make the max height equal to 100% VH. And then that's what allows us to have a nice backdrop while also not allowing the user to scroll until they close the modal. And so is child route is used in a few more places. Let's go ahead and take a look. There's also this thing called transition. If you're not familiar with this, this is a component from a library called Headless UI. Headless UI is built by the Tailwind team. So if you're familiar with Tailwind, definitely give it a look. It's a pretty cool library, although I have found a few bugs here and there. But for the most part, pretty solid library. I definitely would recommend it. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out. Anyway, so now we have our transition and we have a transition child. So the transition child allows us to compose animations together. So our first animation is the backdrop animation, and then our second animation is the like actual drawer or sheet that is sliding out. And so there's a couple of properties here. First one being as basically says like what is the element that you'd like to render. So in this case, we don't want it to be the default, which is a div. We want it to be a button, and that button is going to have a transition opacity and a duration of 150 milliseconds on both the enter from and enter to. These are the transition states going from and to the enter state. And then there's also leave from and leave to. Enter and leave are both, they're both used between the from and to states. So anything that's shared, you should place on leave or enter. And anything that is explicit from the enter from or enter to, you put in its respective prop accordingly. And then anything that's shared the entire time, you just use the class name. So here we're saying we want the backdrop to be absolute and pinned to the top left bottom right quadrants of the screen, have an opacity of 80, and have a background of Stone 900. So another thing here is I'm taking into account screen readers, and in the scenario where a screen reader tries to click this button, I want to tell them that they're going to be closing this drawer. And so what that actually is this backdrop, right? So if I click the backdrop, we are closing the drawer. There's also focus states, so if you focus on to that, which if you're using a screen reader you might, it'll tell you, hey, this is a close button, press the space bar to close it, etc. So that just is a little bit more of a friendly way of doing that. Cool. So that's that. Now let's talk about how we are dealing with form state and how we can get away with not using JavaScript. So we've got something called use search params. Use search params is basically going to be our use state. And here we're peeling out all of the arrays that are used for each section of the checkboxes. So here we have fit, color, type, and category. And for each checkbox, I just say, hey, let's set it to checked if this value is included in its respective array. So now if we go ahead and click filter and we go ahead and select these things and click show products, you can see here we've got those parameters appended to the URL. And then if I hit clear all, the parameters go away and we can open it back up and you can see those parameters are gone. So the way that works, if we scroll down here to the bottom, effectively what I'm doing is creating a link, and that link is going back to the products page, and we're saying that the search, which is our query parameter for the URL, we're building a new URL search params object and calling toString on it. But before we do that, we basically say, give me an array from search params, and I want to filter that array by the keys that are not included in this filter keys array. So filter keys is just saying, okay, here are all of our form keys, which is going to be fit, color, type, and category. If it doesn't match any of those, we're not going to remove them, right? So here, in order to clear things out, we clear all of the search params except for the ones that we don't know about, because there might be a situation where like you've got a Google Tag Manager running or some sort of analytics service, and it's appending query parameters to the URL. You don't want to mess with that stuff. So here we're explicitly saying like, hey, if they're parameters that we explicitly know about, go ahead and throw them in the garbage. Cool. So let's see. I think that actually might be it, really. Another thing to note is specifically with the close button. If we go ahead and hit show products and then we go and click close, you can see that the parameters are persisted, and the way that we do that is just by taking the previous set of search parameters and forwarding them on to the products URL. So you'll notice when we click the close button, we go from products filter to products, but the query parameters are maintained. And so this allows you to have a full-blown experience without writing or without loading any JavaScript on the front end. And effectively you could do filtering of your data, whatever, without having to incur the cost of having your users load a ton of JavaScript on the client. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and if it was, go ahead and leave a comment, subscribe, tell me what you liked, tell me what you hated, whatever. Thanks guys, take care.